Okay, today here at Frankie's Record Shop, we've got some records from the 1960s and early 1970s that I'm going to go through that I absolutely adore that are in my collection. And the first one we're going to start with is the debut LP from Moby Grape. As you can see, I have the original Middle Finger album cover for all you collectors. This record is a beautiful, phenomenal, unique understatement of a rock and roll record that has gone on to influence numerous amounts of people. It's psychedelic rock, it's folk rock, it's country, it's got all the great elements of the 1960s in it, originality up the wazoo. This is a band, this record came out in September of 1967. And was recorded in March of, they started recording it in March of 1967, and Sgt. Pepper's wasn't even out. The record that everyone is assuming is the greatest, most influential pop record of all time, which I would not doubt that it is, but there were bands that were operating in a space that was even more cutting edge in some ways than the Beatles were at that time. And this album certainly qualifies. These guys were probably writing and playing these songs as early as 1966 and were doing things far more advanced than you even heard on Rubber Soul by the Beatles. Not to diminish, of course, those records. I'm just saying, Moby Grape, they're up there. They're amazing. This album is something you should listen to. And in keeping with that theme of a 1967 album that came out prior or concurrently to other cutting-edge records, namely Sgt. Pepper's, is Country Joe and the Fish, Electric Music for the Mind and Body. This actually came out in March of 1967, and many of the songs that were written for this record, that appear on this record, came out on EPs that were released in different forms in 1965 and 1966. So by 66, they were already electrified and doing this amazingly experimental folk, country, blues, jazz, R&B, rock hybrid that quite, I think, literally freaked out establishment figures all over the place. I mean, we're talking from Frank Sinatra to Quincy Jones. They hated this fucking shit. They hated it with a passion because it represented actual freedom, actual people coming together and integrating and loving one another and being interested in each other, rather than these binary musical formats those people dealt within to control whoever their constituents were that they wanted to control. Because rock and roll has always been an antisocial, anti-establishment art form, and anyone who hates rock and roll is an establishment whore, period. And this album is a brilliant example of the San Francisco 1960s music that was freaking the shit out of the establishment. And if you listen to it in 2026, it still sounds just as freaky and just as weird as it did in 1967. Country Joe and the Fish, you gotta check it out. Keeping once again with the Bay Area theme, the 1967 debut record of the Quicksilver Messenger Service, their debut LP, self-titled. It is my favorite record of theirs, even though it may not be their most popular record. There is something about this record I think is a little more special than the records that came after it. The records that came after it are good, but they're a little too, I don't know, there's something missing that this first album gives me that the subsequent ones don't. Even though I like subsequent records by this band, I don't like them as much as this particular record, this 1968 Capitol Records debut from Quicksilver Messenger Service. Once again, the music is somewhat indescribable. It's definitely got the San Francisco psychedelic late 60s experimental craziness to it, and folk music influence and country music influence and blues and R&B. That's the great thing about all the Bay Area bands. They absorbed all musical influences and deposited them into one kind of entity and then brought that back to the people. And surprise, surprise, the people loved it. And many of the people were not just middle-aged white men. They were women and people of color, black people, Asians, Mexicans. Everybody loved this music for a season because it was really open-ended and special and unique, and it brought people together. Once those establishment people start seeing this shit, they start saying, let's bring out more Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Let's bring out more Chicago. Let's bring out more fat formatted things we can control these people with, because this music is uncontrolled. Quicksilver Messenger Service, 1968 debut. And a favorite record of mine from the early 1970s, another Bay Area thing, 1972 solo record by a member from Moby Grape, that is Bob Mosley. And this LP is one of my actual favorite LPs I have in my entire collection. It is a soul record, it's a gritty R&B record, it's a country record. Bob Mosley has an amazing voice, great musician, fantastic songs, wonderful arrangements, great production. This is a record worth seeking out. I believe it's long out of print. Maybe they've done some reissues, but if not, I would check out this Bob Mosley 1972 LP. It is wonderful. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with today is the I believe this is 66 debut of the Blues Project. Their debut album is live at the Cafe A Go-Go. They are a New York band that featured Steve Katz, who I think went on later to work with Steely Dan in some form. And this is another example of how 60s music was the ultimate expression of a free-for-all, of a just a totally non-binary thought process when it comes to music, to where all these different forms, country and blues and jazz and R&B and even bluegrass, all come together in these strange and wondrous hybrids that bring out all sorts of freaks to the party and says you could be a part of it too, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, no matter what your financial status or racial place or in the hierarchy is. You belong. You can come to a Blues Project show. You can come to a Quicksilver Messenger Service show. You can come to see Moby Grape, and you are welcome to be here to dance and go crazy and freak out and feel the deepest reaches of your soul and let it all out. And that's what all of this music on today's episode represents. And I think this debut from the Blues Project is a really great example of that. And I think all the records I went over today are a great example of that. And it's the great example of why I love music in general, is it brings people together and allows them to express themselves on an individual basis for the betterment of the group. Wonderful.